Good morning. The Maryland Public Service Commission will come to order for our weekly administrative meeting. First up on the docket today, we have minutes to approve from the January 15th, 2020 meeting. All in favor? The minutes are approved. Mr. Secretary, the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, there are 4 items on today's consent agenda. Item 1 is a notification regarding the proposed pro forma change in intermediate ownership of PEG Bandwidth Maryland LLC. Item 2 is a joint application for approval of proposed changes in control of Lingo Communications of the Northeast LLC and Matrix Telecom LLC to Garrison LM LLC. Item 3 is an application from William Harris for certification of a geothermal heating and cooling renewable energy facility. And item 4 is an application from Grid Power Direct LLC for a license to supply electricity or electric generation services in Maryland.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions on any of the consent items? Commissioner Linton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I have questions on item number 4. I don't know if there's a representative of the company here.
Company does not appear to be present, but our technical staff are.
All right, thank you. Good morning. I just wanted to know if the staff was comfortable with the marketing materials that this company has presented and with the name of the company in particular, Grid Power. Just wondering if staff thought there would be any issues regarding consumer confusion regarding the name or the materials that they presented.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Michael Jang on behalf of staff. So regarding the name of the company, could you please clarify what confusion there might be?
Well, I was more concerned, questioning whether or not staff thought there'd be any concern. If the name Grid Power, could be a number of different things. And as we see in other states, Grid Power is primarily markets to commercial entities, landlords of larger residential facilities, not necessarily homeowners like they're planning on doing here. So just wondering if the marketing materials that they presented some information or a different spin on how they were going to interact with consumers in Maryland.
So I have reached out to the company regarding their proposed business plans for residential customers in Maryland. I have not received a response regarding that yet. From my previous conversations with the company, they explained that the majority of their customers, probably around 99 or a bit more than 99% of their customers, are large commercial or industrial customers. The only times that they only have a few situations where they have just single residential customers. In those cases, they might not use their proposed marketing plans or marketing materials that they shared with us for those customers specifically.
Are you expecting a response from them regarding your most recent questions within the near future? Or?
Yes, I asked them today, so okay. I believe the company will respond.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate to request that we hold this item to give the company an opportunity to respond? Seeing as though my concern, just to be clear, is that they're just from looking at their website, it appears that they primarily market and outreach to commercial and industrial companies, but they've sought the license to market and operate to residential customers in Maryland. And to the extent they've developed marketing materials that demonstrates they're capable of doing that, that's fine. I don't have a concern with that, but it doesn't appear as though that's what they've presented as of this point. So if they are going to respond to the staff and present that information, or at least tell us that they're working on it and it's coming soon, then I think it's worth waiting.
No, I think it is appropriate if staff contacted the party today. Let's do this. We'll grant a brief continuance. We'll put this on the January 29th administrative meeting. And Mr. Jang, if we could bring this back with a response from Grid Power Direct LLC 7 days from today, we'll take it up then and hopefully have addressed the concerns that Commissioner Linton has raised.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any additional questions? Is there a motion on the consent items?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For items number one, I move that we note the transaction. For item number two, I move that we note the potential transfer of control of Lingo Communications of the Northeast LLC and Matrix Telecom LLC to Garrison LM LLC, and direct the licensees to notify the Commission in the event of any changes to the control of Lingo Communications of the Northeast LLC and Matrix Telecom LLC that may result under this transaction. For item number three, I move that we approve the application and issue a renewable energy facility certification number with the energy savings estimate, direct the applicant to establish a REC account with PJM GATS within 30 days of certification and file a geothermal and thermal biomass generation report with the Commission within 1 week of each recording of generation data with GATS of RECs created, and direct the applicant to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any change to the information in the application.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
The motions are approved. Mr. Secretary, the administrative agenda.
Mr. Chairman, item number 5 is an application from Potomac Electric Power Company for authorization of the issuance of up to $1.2 billion of debt securities.
Thank you. And we have counsel for the utility present. Yeah. Good morning, Mr. McAuliffe.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Drew McAuliffe on behalf of staff. On October 31st, 2019, Potomac Electric Power Company requested authorization to issue up to $1.2 billion of debt securities. The company indicates that the proceeds from the sale of any debt will be used to refund short-term debt used to fund ongoing capital requirements and to fund general corporate purposes relating to PEPCO's utility business. In 2018, the Commission authorized PEPCO to issue up to $600 million in debt. PEPCO has not issued $140 million of the debt authorized by the Commission in 2018. This unissued amount of $140 million is included as part of the $1.2 billion of debt for which PEPCO now seeks authorization. Thus, if the Commission grants PEPCO's new request to issue debt, PEPCO will be able to issue an additional $1.06 billion in debt beyond the amount of debt that the Commission authorized in 2018. Under Public Utilities Article 6101 and 6102, a public service company that operates in Maryland may not, without prior Commission authorization, issue debt that is payable wholly or partly more than 12 months after the assumption, guarantee, or issuance of any of those items. The information in the application and in PEPCO's response to questions posed by staff regarding the anticipated use of the funds that would be raised by the proposed debt issuance indicates that the debt issuance satisfies the standards in Komar and the Public Utilities article of the Annotated Code of Maryland. Staff recommends that the Commission grant the application and issue a final order in compliance with Komar 2007-0402C, authorizing PEPCO to issue up to $1.2 billion of debt securities.
Thank you. Does counsel for the utility have anything additional to add to the request?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Mike Keel. This is a rather large issuance, but also straightforward. Do the commissioners have questions? Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I just have a question for the company. Regarding your ability to select different underwriters or placement agents, could you just very briefly describe the process the company would use to select?
Sure. I'm going to turn that over to Mr. McGowan. He would be the one to handle that.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
For the record, Kevin McGowan with PEPCO Holdings. So the process is that we look at both the public market and also the private market. So we have various relationships with different investment bankers that we talk to, and we select an investment banker that we think is right for the offering. But we do look at the market, look at interest rates, look at investor demand for different types of securities, and we'll pick whether the private market or the public market is the best way to go. But there is a process for every issuance that we go through to find the most appropriate, least costly debt.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask staff, and I think we talked about this last time about these debt instruments and how Komar 20.7 and 01 and 02 work. Have staff looked at that? I mean, it seems from Komar, this is intended to be more forward-looking and somewhat detailed. But in the applications, I have no problem today with this application. It's more of a question of, do we need to take a look, or would staff suggest we take a look at this Komar and see if it's really fulfilling the intent of looking at these debt instruments, particularly since we're talking about multi-jurisdictional companies and with out-of-state owners. Anyway, I just wanted your
Staff feels that the Komar is appropriate. Pepco and Delmarva, as we'll see next, they did provide forward-looking project lists, which staff and engineers were able to look at.
in enough detail that you
Yes.
Okay.
In the buck sheet, I believe there was over 500 projects. So we do get quite a detailed report. We also get reports after they issue the debt. So we feel Komar is appropriate and covers all the bases that we needed to.
Okay. And how about the reporting requirement? As noted, you haven't received the report yet from the previous
Right.
Debt instruments because they have not finished spending those amounts. Is it timely enough? Are you finding that the reports are timely?
Yes. So they do file the reports immediately when they issue a tranche within the greater debt that the commission approves. So it's only we only don't get the final report once all the debt is issued. So, for example, for this filing, it's 1.2 billion. So we will get reports as they issue, say 150 million here,
Okay.
150 million there. We just won't get the final report until they issue all of the money.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Commissioner Herman.
Mr. McGowan, 2 years ago, or approximately 2 years ago, the issuance was for 600 million, and this is 1.2 billion. Has Pepco ever had and requested an issuance of this magnitude before?
Commissioner, as far as I recall, this is the largest one that Pepco has requested. I would note that the 1.2 does include about $309 million for refinancing. So in terms of new monies, it's only about $890 million. And the funding is for the Pepco distribution, the DC distribution, and also our transmission operation. So it's for Pepco as a whole.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is there a motion on this item?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman. I move that we grant the application in compliance with Komar 2007-0402C, authorizing the company to issue up to 1.2 billion of debt securities.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved.
Item number 6 is an application from Delmarva Power and Light Company for authorization of the issuance of up to $475 million of debt securities.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Drew McAuliffe on behalf of staff. On October 31st, 2019, Delmarva Power and Light requested authorization to issue up to $475 million of debt securities. The company indicates that the proceeds from any sale of any debt will be used to refund short-term debt, used to fund ongoing capital requirements, and to fund general corporate purposes relating to DPL's utility business. In 2018, the Commission authorized DPL to issue up to $350 million in debt. DPL has not issued $75 million of the debt authorized by the Commission in 2018. This unissued amount of $75 million is included as part of this $475 million of debt for which DPL now seeks authorization. Thus, if the Commission grants DPL's new request to issue debt, DPL would be able to issue an additional $400 million in debt beyond the amount of debt that the Commission authorized in 2018. Under Public Utility Article 6101 and 6102, a public service company that operates in Maryland may not, without prior Commission authorization, issue debt that is payable wholly or partly more than 12 months after the assumption, guarantee, or issuance of any of those items. The information in the application and in DPL's responses to questions posed by staff regarding the anticipated use of the funds that would be raised by the proposed debt issuance indicates that the debt issuance satisfies the standards in Komar and the Public Utilities article of the Annotated Code of Maryland. Staff recommends that the Commission grant the application and issue a final order in compliance with Komar 2007-0402C, authorizing DPL to issue up to $475 million in debt securities.
Thank you. Mr. Michael, anything to add here?
No, Your Honor.
No. Any questions? Commissioner Richard.
Just, I was interested to know. I meant to ask on the last one, but for Mr. McKeel, when you talk about the budgets, construction budgets, there's a customer-driven and load-driven. How do you differentiate between those two? I'm just curious. Is it just granularity? I mean,
Customer-driven is for projects that we're doing for specific customers, I believe, and load-driven has to do with how our load is growing. You know, whether or not we're getting load growth. in certain areas, and so we have to do work to deal with the load growth in that area.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Linton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's really the same question I had the first time, just to understand the selection process that the company uses. I'm assuming the language is the same as draft.
Yeah, we would either go to the private or the public based on what the best costs we're going to get, the best price.
So I like to assume then that this process that the company uses and the relationships that it uses also relies on diverse firms that you may have access to, or firms that would be certified under the PC-16 process?
Yes, absolutely. In the past, as we select underwriters for our offerings, we've looked at diverse firms and CB firms, and we've included them as a portion of the underwriting offering. We do look at that as part of our diversity spin for the company. Same process for PEPCO and DPO.
Great. Thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to just understand a little bit about how the company makes a decision on this debt issuance. So you currently have $275 million. DPL has $275 million of authorization that exists, right?
I believe it's $75 million remaining.
So my buck sheet says in 2018 we authorized $350 million, $75 million of the authorized debt. Oh, has not been issued. $75 million. Sorry, excuse me.
Yes.
So I read that wrong. So you have $75 million. Do you keep a certain amount of reserve authorization? How does that? What triggers your request to come in for additional authorization?
So we always want to make sure that the companies have enough capacity to issue what they need, especially if, in terms of financial crisis or just normal operating conditions. So as we get closer to $75 million, we generally like to issue debt between $100 and maybe $300 million, depending if we go to the private market or the public market. So we always want to make sure we have enough capacity. We don't want to put ourselves into a bind. So as we approached the end of last year, we recognized that we were running low on the authorization. So we try to do both applications, PEPCO and Delmarva, at the same time. And so it was just sort of a time. Every 2 or 3 years, we try to re-up what our authorization is, so we know we have enough capacity to issue our debt, given our business needs over the next several years.
Fair enough. I don't have a problem. I'm just seeking to understand a little bit how
Sure.
that process works. Thank you.
With that, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the commission grant the application in compliance with Komar 20.07.04.02C, authorizing the company to issue up to $475 million of debt securities.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. The motion is approved.
Item number 7 is a request from Ogas Energy LLC and Earth and Air Technologies LLC for a waiver and extension of the operational deadline for community solar energy generating systems pursuant to Komar 20.62.03.04C.
Thank you. Do we have counsel for Ogos and Earth and Air? Thank you, sir. If you could take the podium. We'll begin with staff counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Annette Garofalo on behalf of Commission staff. Ogos Energy LLC and Earth and Air Technologies LLC are seeking waivers of the operational deadline established under Komar 20.62.03.04C for the following 4 community solar energy generating systems: Shepherd's Mill Road, Williams Road, Cleaves Mill Road, and Liberty Road. The Cleaves Mill Road CGIS is in Sykesville, Maryland. It's a 30% low and moderate income project located in BGE's service territory. The capacity was awarded for Cleaves Road on March 18, 2019, and its 18-month time for building under Komar 20.62.03.04C will not expire until September 15, 2020. In other words, this project is in the first year of construction, and staff recommends against a waiver at this time as premature. The Liberty Road CGIS in Eldersburg, Maryland is a 51% LMI CGIS located in BGE's service territory. This project is a year 1 project. The 18-month time for building under Komar will expire on April 14, 2020, approximately 4 months from now, and staff recommends that the Commission grant the waiver. The Williams Road CGIS in Flintstone, Maryland is a 51% LMI CGIS located in PE's service territory. This project is a year one project that was subject to a day-for-day extension due to a pending legal challenge whose 18-month period for building under Komar will not expire until February 2021, over a year from now, and staff recommends against a waiver given the long time span prior to the end of this period. Finally, the Shepherd's Mill Road, Segis, in Union Bridge, Maryland, is a 30% LMI facility located in PE's service territory. This project is a year one project whose 18-month operation deadline for building under Komar expired on March 29th, 2019. Although it appears that PE is continuing to work with Ogas toward completion of the joint project, despite that expiration of the date. According to applicants, construction is expected to be completed by September 30th, 2020. Ogas has secured a 25-year lease on land where large-scale solar is permitted as of right, has full financing of the project through Standard Solar, Inc., and has obtained a $400,000 grant commitment from the Maryland Energy Administration for LMI support.
Ms. Garofalo, excuse me, would you mind pulling the microphone a little bit closer
Oh,
to
sure.
you? Thank you.
In light of the timing of this request, staff is obligated to recommend denial of an extension because the time frame under Komar has expired. However, the project has much to recommend it, and it is unlikely that a successful LMI project will replace this one. For that reason, staff recommends the Commission deny the application for a standard waiver of applicants for their Shepherd's Mill Road Segis because it was filed out of time. But staff recommends the Commission reinstate the project with an operational deadline of September 26, 2020. This is the date that would apply to the project were the regulations that we brought before you still in effect. And it also would amount to a complete waiver of Komar and kind of a restart. And staff is doing this because we think it is such a worthwhile project.
Thank you, Ms. Garofalo. Counsel for Ogas and Earth and Wind, Earth and Air.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Michael Miller. I am actually the principal owner of Ogas Energy LLC. Ogas Energy LLC and Earth and Air formed a joint venture at the very beginning, an informal joint venture at the very beginning of the Maryland Community Solar Program. And we have been developing as subscriber organizations a number of projects across the state. This project, Shepherd's Mill Road, that is the subject of the request for the complete waiver, is a project approved for Ogas Energy as a subscriber organization. We, I think, are the only team that is completely dedicated to exclusively bringing forward LMI projects within the Maryland Community Solar Project. All of the projects that we are currently working on that have been mentioned here are targeted for LMI. And in addition, we have some later stage projects which will also be targeted for LMI as they come forward. We started with the Community Solar Program from the very beginning, working through rulemaking and looking for sites across Maryland and building up relationships such as the one that was mentioned with Standard Solar for financing and with engineering companies for construction and permitting, etc. What's really special about the Shepherd's Mill Road project is that we consciously picked a site that, while it has a lot of challenges in terms of the topology of the site, it is actually zoned industrial. So it's permitted by right for solar, and there's a lot of resistance around the state for example, use of ag land for projects. So we have gone through a lot of effort to find sites that are really ideal. We put a lot of work and energy into each of these projects. Before completing my comments on the Shepherd's Mill project, I would just want to highlight two other projects that we have been involved in. The one is the so-called Browning project, which is stated was subject to a day-for-day extension. We got permission from a local zoning board in early January 2017 to build that project, and then a nearby landowner, appealed, and we were in court literally for 2 years, all the way up to the Court of Special Appeals to finally get approval of that project. And all the while, with the uncertainty of whether that was going to happen, we maintained the project and continued its development. We negotiated the financing for it. It is a 51% LMI project, and we should be breaking ground on that project very, very shortly, in a matter of a few weeks. Another project, which was one of our first projects, actually started off in the community solar program, and we did get to the end of the time available and ended up having to basically develop the project as just a non-community solar project. But that project is 2 megawatts, and it is energized, and it's up and running. So we're happy about that. We essentially have been working this set of projects diligently and trying to make sure that we had a story to tell in order to get the financing, get the required extensions, maintain the relationships with the landowners, and ultimately get these things built. I think it's well known that so many projects, even in the open category, have taken much, much longer than people anticipated. Notwithstanding that, regardless of what happens with the rest of the queue, we always start off applying for LMI because we think it's important to be able to do that. And we are very confident that if we can continue to work on Shepherd's Mill, that it will come online this year as an LMI project. And we have a written and firm financing agreement to get that project constructed.
Mr. Miller, let me interject at this point. With respect to the 4 projects, including Shepherd's Mill, you heard Ms. Garofalo make a number of recommendations on behalf of staff. Do you wish to speak to any of those recommendations on those 4 projects?
So with regard to the Williams Road project, the point I think that staff was making is that we don't actually need a waiver because we have gotten written agreement from Potomac Edison that our request for a day-for-day extension is legitimate. So they've given us a letter extending the expiration date for the capacity into January of 2021, I believe.
So you concur with their position on Williams Road?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What-
Yes.
Let's move on to another one then.
With respect to the Liberty Road project, which is in the BG&E territory, we do need a waiver because of just the time to get the project completed. We are within the current extension, but we will not be commercially operational before that expires. That project is another project that's built on industrial land. It happens that the landowner took his entire parcel through major subdivision because of other things he was doing on the property. So in order for us to do solar, we have to go through the major subdivision, major site plan process, because once any parcel or part of a parcel has been through major site plan, any future changes to that site has to go through that process.
So some additional complications, but Ms. Garofalo's recommendation is that the waiver be granted, so you have no concerns with that project. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
we request
Could
that.
I ask
yeah.
also, is through December 15, 2020, is that adequate? Is that what
Yes.
you're requesting? Okay, great,
Yes,
thank you.
it-
All right, so let's move on then to the next project.
The next project is well, there was one project which was the Cleaves Mill Road, and the recommendation was to not provide the waiver or not consider the waiver without prejudice because we haven't run out of time, and we are also very comfortable with that. we will, we put that in because we didn't want to essentially come back and forth to the commission. But it is a fact that we have not yet gotten close to the expiration of the time that we already have available.
So you concur with staff's position to deny your request on Cleaves Mill?
Well, in the written report, I thought it said dismiss or deny without prejudice.
That's correct. Which would require you to come in at some point prior to expiration.
In all likelihood, we would come back in. We would have to come back in for that request. We don't mind coming back in, but we put it in because we know it's almost inevitable that we will have to come back in. So our preference would be to have it granted today. I would say at the same time, we're going with Cleaves Mill Road, we're going to continue to diligently work on developing that project. And if we don't get the waiver today, which would be great if we got it, we will come back in closer to the expiration and make the same case that that we could make today.
Okay, let's finish.
May I ask a question on that one?
Sure.
So if you got the waiver today, you're asking for 9 months, but what would the date be? What would the operational date be? You need the waiver till when?
For Cleaves Mill, we really think that we would be somewhere in the first quarter of 21.
Although I do note on your filing that it says achievable operations date June 15th of 21.
Well, I'm just being aggressive.
Okay, all right. Let's mention your last project, and then we'll open it up for questions, which is the Shepherd's Mill project.
So for Shepherd's Mill, again, we agree with staff's recommendation as we understand it, which is that that the commission would render a decision which would allow us to complete the project as a community solar project, as an LMI project, and the time frame that staff has recommended is workable for us because we really are pretty much ready to start construction of the project. There are a few minor things to be done. The issue of whether or not it is a waiver in the most traditional sense or a waiver which essentially says you don't qualify under this provision, but we'll make a different exception. Obviously, our concern is just that we not have to walk away from a project which has enormous potential. We put a lot of work
And
into.
I think that's what you heard from Ms. Garofalo.
So,
there.
yes,
Okay, so you're in agreement essentially on all 4 of the recommendations?
that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Do commissioners have questions of the parties? Commissioner Herman?
So, Mr. Miller, can you explain to me why this request is almost a year late? What happened with the waiver? Why wasn't the waiver made in a timely basis?
Sure. The waiver was made in, I believe it was July of 2019.
That's when you originally filed the waiver for
I believe.
Shepherd's Mill?
I think it was September 11th, but,
I'm sorry. That you're absolutely right.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
But nonetheless, it was
Yeah.
not yesterday or a week ago.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I
And can you
apologize.
explain why, were you aware of the requirements? And if so, why wasn't the waiver made on a timely basis?
Right. First of all, it was a mistake. Second of all, we were in a situation where we were focused on the good cause shown, and specifically the ability to come in and say, here's the date by which we think we can complete the project. So in the March timeframe, we were finishing up and financing and starting construction of our first project, which was on Old New Windsor Pike. We were in the middle of the litigation on the Browning project, which is the project that had the 2-year delay, and we were transitioning from one company which we had arranged to finance our projects with, and that didn't work out.
So it
And-
fell through the cracks? Is that what you're telling me? It just kind of,
It was a combination of falling through the cracks, but it was also a mistake on our part to err on the side of trying to get our ducks more in a row and have a more complete explanation of where we were and when we would have everything done. And at the, for example, we signed the financing agreement for Shepherd's Reel after March.
okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Ms. Garofalo, I have a couple of legal questions for you. And I see you smiling. All right. So let's start with the acknowledgement. Is that necessary? Is that legally necessary? The commission doesn't usually acknowledge or issue any sort of, that's almost like an advisory opinion. So is the acknowledgement, which is for Williams Road, necessary for us to do?
I'm not quite sure I understand.
Well, on your,
Back to my comment.
I'm looking at, recognize, I guess your
Oh.
comments say we recognize.
That, that's,
So, is that recognition necessary legally?
it's not necessary.
Okay. All right. Now the big question is on the Shepherd's Mill, because if we didn't, your recommendation is that we deny the application for a standard waiver and reinstate the project. So where do our regs say that we can do that? And what is it that we need to do if the commission were to agree that we should have this project continue on? This is a little legally fuzzy for me.
Right, yes, well, this is, so staff feels obligated to say that under the regs, there are standard timeframes, 12 months plus 6 months plus a waiver of a time certain. This is a recognition by staff anyway that this request for a waiver has come too late, and we can't really recommend that the waiver be granted under the regulations. However, the commission does have the power to actually just waive the full regulation. And so to the extent that the commission wanted to do that, to waive the time frame would be appropriate. I did put a date in there, which it would be compliant with regulations that have been proposed, but I recognize those regulations have not been accepted, and in fact there was even questioning at the time of the rulemaking as to what we would rely on, and if we were to rely on those things for this case, that would not, Mr. Miller would not get his waiver. But staff thinks this is such a valuable project that we think, as a legal matter, you could waive the entire regulation and you could just start him over again.
Okay, but your recommendation doesn't say we should waive the entire regulation. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Oh,
It
well-
says deny the application for a standard waiver and reinstate the project. So I'm just trying to understand what the motion from a legal standpoint should be. Should it be to waive
2062.
2062-0304C?
Correct.
0304C, and we would just waive that provision, and require that the project have an operational deadline of September 26, 2020.
Correct. That's what I am asking you to do. Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to be
Yeah.
clear. And is there anybody here from Potomac Edison?
No.
No. Okay. So, Ms. Garofalo, when you said they were in discussions with Potomac Edison, has that been sort of throughout, or just recently, or?
They are still in Potomac Edison's queue. I've had conversations with Potomac Edison. I did ask them some questions. I think Mr. Miller might be better able to answer where he stands with Potomac Edison, other than that he's
Okay.
in the queue. But I have talked with Mr. Trout, and he did say, yes, they had continued to work with and talk to Ogos and their partner.
Okay, and in your opinion, your legal opinion, is it incumbent on Potomac Edison to, under the regulations, to kind of put them out of the queue once they, once they've been, they haven't gotten a waiver and they're not operational?
Well, we would expect them to do that. I'm not certain there's a regulation for that requires them to do
Okay.
that, because once, there are a lot of things that can go on about getting into the queue and being held in the queue and being
Okay.
taken out of the queue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask the company, some of these projects have been delayed for legal reasons, legal challenges, others for local planning and zoning processes, and the developer. But I want to talk to you about the financing of these projects and how that has impacted your ability to move these projects forward. Could you discuss that a little bit for the commission, please?
Sure. So we started permitting these projects, at least the early ones, in 2017. And we did look for financing from a number of sources. I mean, we look for financing broadly. And eventually we got into a written agreement with one financing source, which was not Standard Solar, and got into advanced negotiations for a couple of projects. Ultimately, for reasons that I don't want to go too much into, because obviously there's a confidentiality agreement, but basically those negotiations eventually failed, and perhaps to some extent because of the low to moderate income nature of our portfolio. So there was a period, which gratefully was short, of 2 months, where we were not under financing with any entity. So it took us 2 months to bounce from company A to find and build a relationship with Standard Solar. So once we got the relationship with Standard Solar, we signed agreements on a project, and that project moved smoothly, and that project is producing 2 megawatts of electricity now. Then we moved on to the next set of projects, which would include the Shepherd's Mill project, and it's all been about due diligence, permitting, etc. So I would say it's difficult, but I would also say that we as a company and as a team have learned a lot about what it takes to make a bankable project, and we've been really well received by our financing source for the projects. And as far as we know, the potential for us to do more than a half a dozen projects with the same company exists at this point, and that's part of the infrastructure that we've built up.
With your financiers, do you have to demonstrate some level of subscribers? Do you have to do that ahead of time? Tell me how that works, if you would.
The subscription process does tend to come a little bit later in the overall cycle, because the shelf life of a potential subscriber is not that long. So there is a little bit of a chicken and egg issue there, and there's also an issue about the extent to which we, Ogos Energy, go out and get subscribers, or whether some third-party entity participates, in that process. But the issue of subscribers really boils down to the utility territory. So, for example, we have BGE projects and Potomac Edison projects. The process of selling 2 megawatts in BG&E doesn't really depend on the site. It depends on your ability to go out and do that work. And then sometimes, like for example, Shepherd's Mill and Browning, which are 2 projects which could break ground in the next few weeks if we leave here with good results. Those are being kind of marketed interchangeably, and that would actually accelerate if we get the waiver for Shepherd's Mill. So it is harder by a long shot to deal with the LMI part of the subscription, but part of our mission is to crack that code and be best practices on how to bring LMI projects forward.
Do your financiers require you to demonstrate some capability of that you're going to be successful in getting the necessary subscriptions to make the project successful? I mean, how do they evaluate your capability to do that before they decide to provide financing?
It's more an evaluation of the project's ability. It's the economics of the project to support the subscription rate and the loss rate, etc., is what counts the most. Now, in the case of Shepherd's Mill, which is the project that I think is the focus of our discussion here, we, through the encouragement of David Comas at the Maryland Energy Administration, applied for an LMI grant. That was granted, and then we had to get an extension for that, which was granted. And so we do have a $400,000 grant from the Maryland Energy Administration to make it more practical for us to serve LMI customers by offering them a larger discount. And we will continue to look for creative ways, to make these projects work.
I note the Cleaves Mill Road project and the Shepherd's Mill Road project are 30% LMI, and the other two projects are 51% LMI. Do the financiers look at that, and is that that percentage of the project set as a function of the service territory? How's that work?
Well, the 50% LMI projects get approved under the so-called small brownfield and other category.
Okay.
And getting from 30% to 50% is not trivial. So we actually have kind of bitten off, that's a heavy lift that we've bitten off, and that we're committed to. But that's a heavy lift, and separate and apart from the discussion we're having here today, I think there's room to talk about the 30% versus 50% and whether they might be collapsed, et cetera, but that's obviously a different discussion.
Sure. No, I appreciate this discussion. I think we're almost to the point where we're not just granting every single waiver request that comes before us, but we're now to the point today where we're almost pre-authorizing before it's even timely waiver requests, and that's a concern for me, as this commission has heard ongoing. So I'm going to be supportive of, as a minimum, the staff's recommendations, because at least it's not a pre-authorization that kind of discussed. But I do appreciate the discussion of financing, because I have to tell you, sir, we hear a lot of reasons, from winter weather to the dog ate the homework kind of reasons why these projects are extended. And your discussion of financing, which is, I believe, at the heart of many of these, is the best discussion I think we've heard to date on why some of these projects are not being brought to fruition timely. And I think we benefit by that forthright discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Seeing no additional questions, Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, I just had a question about, for the Shepherd's Mill Road. Right now, the motion we're looking at would extend or assumes the operational deadline of September 26, 2020. If we were to grant a waiver, would that be the correct date, or is that too soon, or do you need something further out in the distant future?
Quite honestly, we think that should be adequate.
Adequate? Okay.
Mr. Miller, you said you have no disagreement with staff counsel's recommendation, although with respect to Cleaves Mill, you would request the 9-month waiver. That would get you to my calculation of May 18th, 2021, and I believe you said that would be sufficient time. to save you the opportunity and the burden of coming back to this commission in approximately 6 months, I think you've demonstrated good cause to grant that waiver. And so I would amend the motion. I would propose to amend the motion to grant the additional 9 months for Cleaves Mill and leave the other projects subject to the staff recommendation. I'd like to see if my colleagues would support such a motion.
Yeah, no, I was going to suggest we go all the way to the June 15th, but if May 18th is fine, 2021, I'm okay with that as well. Just based on Commissioner Herman's questioning, I wonder if we should be maybe a little more specific on the Shepherd Mill Road and state that we're granting a full waiver of Komar 2062-34C, and that it for the purpose of reinstating the project with an operational date, just to be
Okay,
clear.
let's table that amendment for a motion, a moment.
I'm just asking.
Okay.
I'm suggesting if based on the question, whether we should do that, just to be very clear.
Before we inquire on that, I'd like to get Commissioner's positions on the Cleaves Mills extension to grant for 9 months.
So for the reason I just got done stating, I'm not going to vote to support a pre-authorization of a waiver before it's timely. I'm not going to do that.
Thank you. Commissioner Herman?
I would say I would also deny. I think that we have regulations for a purpose, and since Mr. Miller has stated that he would be fine with coming back and asking for that waiver when and if he needs it, and it's possible that he may not need it for as long as that. And I think the whole point of these regulations was trying to get these projects online. So while I don't believe that Mr. Miller would delay on purpose, I still think that it's appropriate to maintain the requirement that they come back in for a waiver.
Thank you. And Commissioner Linton?
I would grant the request for the waiver until June 2021, but if the company is comfortable with May, that's fine with me.
Thank you. With respect to Commissioner Richards' question regarding the Shepherd's Mill and the general waiver of Komar, Ms. Garofalo, would that be the appropriate motion to allow them to extend their operational deadline to September of 2020?
This is for Shepherd's Mill?
Yes,
Yes. I think that would be.
just a general waiver
a general
of
waiver
Komar.
of Komar.
Okay,
That particular section.
okay. Thank you. I will,
Mr. Chairman, one more thing. I would propose that we not acknowledge or recognize an operational deadline. To me, that is in the form of a level of an advisory opinion, and I would prefer that we not. It has been, or I would say it is not customary for this commission to do so, and I think that everybody understands that. That may be correct, and I don't think there's any misunderstanding here, so I don't think that we need to make any sort of formal acknowledgement or recognition of a deadline that exists.
Commissioner Herman, I don't see recognition in the recommendation.
Well, it was in Ms. Garofalo's, on the buck sheet says recognition, and that,
Oh, is your concern the word
or-
acknowledge?
my concern is that we don't need to do this. This is, they already have another year. We don't need to acknowledge that that's the time frame. The time frame is what the time frame is, and that it's not necessary to do so, and that we should not make that record.
Okay, I would agree with you. It's not necessary at this point.
Well, can I say, it's not necessary, but the company has requested, and with the discussion we just had about financing, I mean, part of the reason the company asked for that is just to reassure that they leave here today with this commission accepting that they have a day, the day-for-day extension. So if it doesn't harm anything, I don't understand why we would deny the company the request of the acknowledgement. That's all we're doing.
So, if I may, so in general, the utilities handle these day-for-day extensions, so that's why otherwise you'd be deluged with these requests. And so I actually just felt I needed to include something in here as a recommendation. But I think if you're concerned that someone will look after this, I think this is one that's in Potomac Edison's service territory, and they would be watching this particular um, project.
I don't necessarily see a harm. We'll take a vote individually on each of these, and commissioners will be able to cast their votes accordingly. So on the first motion, it would be to grant to grant Ogos Energy and Earth and Air Technologies LLC a 9-month extension for the Cleaves Mill Road project that would bring them to May 18th, 2021. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Opposed.
Noting Commissioner O'Donnell and Commissioner Herman's opposition, that motion carries. Number 2, grant the applicants time-limited waiver of Komar 20.62.3.4 for their Liberty Road CSEG through December 15th, 2020. All in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition? The motion carries. Number 3, acknowledge the time period for building the Williams Road CSEGs under Komar 20.62.3.4C is extended to February 2021. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
Commissioner O'Donnell and Herman dissenting. The motion carries. Finally, deny the application for a standard waiver of applicants for their Shepherd's Mill Road CSEGs because it was filed out of time, but reinstate the project with an operational deadline of September 26th, 2020 under a general waiver of the Code of Maryland regulations. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary.
Item number 8 is a proposal from Baltimore Gas and Electric Company to revise its standby service price.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Afton Hauer on behalf of staff. On December 19th, 2019, the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company filed Supplement 463 to PSC MD G-9 Rider 3 Standby Service Price. The standby service price reflects the pipeline capacity cost for providing standby service. Standby service is a voluntary service under Rider 3 for Schedule C daily metered customers, which typically are large commercial and industrial customers. Standby service provides a customer with a backup supply of natural gas when the customer's primary pipeline supplier has interrupted service. Customers pay the standby service price under Rider 3 for all therms delivered by BGE in the event the customer's transportation gas fails to be delivered into BGE's distribution system. The company proposes to increase the current standby service price from 0.1332 cents per therm to 0.1339 cents per therm. This will result in a positive monthly bill impact of $23.89, or 0.38%. The proposed change will become effective for the 12-month period beginning with February 2020 billings. The company's calculation of the standby service price is compliant with the Phase 2 settlement agreement in case number 8950, approved in order number 79472. Staff recommends that the Commission accept the proposed tariff for filing to become effective for the 12-month period beginning with February 2020 billings.
Thank you, Ms. Hauer. And this, I believe, is your first appearance before the commission. Is that right?
Yes.
Congratulations. Nice job. Counsel for BG&E, this is not your first appearance before the commission.
No, not even close. I think my first appearance may have been before Ms. Howard was born, but Beverly Secor on behalf of BGE. No comments, just here for questions.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions? Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For item number 8, I move we accept the tariff revisions for filing to be effective for the 12-month period beginning with February 2020 billings.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's approved.
Item number 9 is a proposal from Baltimore Gas and Electric Company to revise its gas choice and reliability charges.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Olivia Kirkendall on behalf of staff. First, I would like to make a correction to a typo in staff's comments. On page 2, the first paragraph on line 4, staff's comments read at the end of the line 0.003 but it should say 0.0031.
1/1000th of a penny off. Okay.
Baltimore Gas and Electric Company filed Supplement 464 to update its Rider 4 gas choice and reliability charges for a 12-month period beginning in the February 2020 billing cycle. Rider 7 recovers costs associated with the gas system capacity and gas customer choice program. BG&E proposes to increase its GCRC to $0.0031 per therm for firm distribution customers and to $0.0032 per therm for its standby customers. The proposed rate charge to suppliers is increased to $0.0016 per therm. The increased estimated system growth capacity volumes from the 2018-2019 to 2019-2020 heating season resulted in a higher cost for both system growth and provider of last resort capacity costs, which is recovered in the Rider 7 charges. The calculations for the proposed rates are compliant with the Phase 2 settlement agreement in case number 8950. Staff recommends the Commission accept BGE's proposed update to its Rider 7 for filing, effective for the 12-month period beginning in February 2020 billings.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkendall. Council?
No further comments, just here for questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Richard?
Yeah, just one question, either for staff or company, whoever can answer it. I was just interested to know or better understand what sample metering, education, and advertising costs are, and what go into that part of the charge we're talking about today.
You know, actually, you want? The sample meters is actually a leftover from back in the days before AMI, when we had to have, and hopefully Mr. Pring will jump up and hit me if I'm wrong, but you know, before we had AMI meters, you know, we needed to get more detailed metering information. So we had sample meters that were, you know, placed randomly throughout the territory to get that additional information. That was the cost of putting those meters out there. But now with AMI, we don't need that, and hopefully the number should be 0.
Okay.
And I believe part of the settlement as to the advertising, that was another legacy from a time many moons ago that really isn't applicable ago, and probably can just take that line out now.
Okay, so it all falls under the gas choice program costs.
Yes.
And so are those the only 3 items, education, advertising, and this sample metering?
Yes, well, that kind of run through this mechanism. I can't say that there haven't been other agreements and other things. This was when we negotiated the GCRC that we agreed would flow through, so that some of the costs would go to suppliers as well as customers.
Okay. No issue today, but I would be interested if either staff or the company could just provide me just more information on what goes into the gas choice program costs.
Yep.
under this rider. Great. Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For item number 9, I move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing to be effective for the 12-month period beginning with February 2020 billings.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is approved.
Item 10 is a proposal from Baltimore Gas and Electric Company to revise its time of use standard offer service energy rates, February 2020 administrative charges, and transmission rates under Rider 1 standard offer service.
Dear Chairman and Commissioners, Benjamin Baker on behalf of staff. BGE filed revised SOS residential and Type 1 rates that go into effect June 1st, 2020. Additionally, BGE filed revised SOS charges to become effective February 1st, 2020. BGE also filed updated transmission rates to correct for cross-subsidization from transferring revenues between Rider 8 and Rider 1 related to FERC-approved PJM settlement revenue to become effective February 1st, 2020. This filing fulfills the Commission's directive to finalize the cross-subsidization issue by the company's next residential Rider 1 filing. Finally, BGE filed SOS tariff language that removes language related to Rider 16, which was closed in the settlement tariff pages filed with the Commission in case 9610 and approved in order number 89400. Staff has reviewed the filings and believes the tariff sheets are to be correct. Staff recommends the Commission approve the proposed tariff changes with an effective date of February 1st, 2020.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you mind, with regard to the cross-subsidization issue, tell me what the 5 affected rate classes are, what those designators are? First one's R residential, right?
Right.
Tell me what the others are, please.
So there are there's 7 impacted, or there's actually 6 impacted classes.
Okay, I'm looking at table 1.
Yes, in table 1. So you have residential, and then you have the residential time of use, which is RL.
Okay.
And then you have general, then that's G and GU, so that's 2 separate
Okay.
rate classes.
Yeah, that is 2, okay.
And then there's general service. GL and P, those 2 rate classes were not impacted by this.
And what is in the general rate class?
I believe those should be your commercial customers.
Commercials. Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
those are kind of the small-ish commercial customers.
I refuse to commit to memory all these different rate designators.
Sometimes I wish we came up with more instinctive abbreviations too myself. And GU is the unmetered class. GS, I believe, is the commercial time of use, and then the GL and P are the big commercial customers.
Any additional questions? Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of February 1st, 2020.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved.
Item number 11 is a proposed tariff revision from Delmarva Power and Light Company to its residential plug-in vehicle time of use SOS rates.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Drew McAuliffe on behalf of staff. In order 88997 in case 9478, Delmarva Power and Light was ordered to offer a whole house time of use rate for standard offer service customers who own an electric vehicle. At the June 19th, 2019 administrative meeting, the Commission accepted DPL's proposed schedule RPIV, whole house standard offer service time of use rates for EV owners. However, staff noted that the RPIV rate for DPL was calculated using PEPCO PJM zonal data rather than DPL data. DPL agreed to file an updated rates using Delmarva zonal data. On December 9th, 2019, DPL submitted a revised RPIV tariff reflecting DPL PJM zonal data. There are no customers currently taking service on this rate. And finally, staff proposes that the Commission accept the filing with an effective date of January 23rd, 2020, and direct DPL to file clean copies of the tariff.
Thank you. Counsel for Delmarva. Counsel, so we approved this rate schedule back in the summer. We have not a single customer on the rate schedule. Do we know the reason why?
I think part of it is it's just not a lot of EV vehicles in the Delmarva Power Service territory. But I asked my folks the same thing, and that was the answer that we got. We'll have to redouble our efforts to get out there. I know it's on our website, and we'll have to do some more outreach to customers to make sure they're aware that we have this whole house time of use rate. We have about 322 folks in the PEPCO service territory that are taking this rate.
Mr. Chairman, if I could interject, I believe even in the order, a lot of stakeholders commented that EV owners aren't usually, they don't usually like a whole house time of use rate, just obviously because it takes all of the usage from their home. They prefer an EV only time of use rate. Now, DPL does have that. It's just that the Commission required them to also offer a whole house time of use rate. But EV customers seem reticent to take the whole house time of use.
No, I think there are some good reasons why they would shy away from that, but 322 to 0.
And that's correct. And part of the 322, if you'll remember, we had an initial whole house time of use rate and a separate EV rate in our first electric vehicle pilot in PEPCO. And so that speaks to why we have more PEPCO customers. The rate's been around for, I want to say, over 3 years. In the PEPCO service territory.
Thank you. Questions? Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the commission accept the tariff revisions for filing and direct the company to file clean copies of the revised tariff pages with an effective date of January 23rd, 2020.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved.
Item number 12 consists of revised tariff pages from Columbia Gas of Maryland, Inc. in compliance with order number 89403.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Paige Shaw on behalf of staff. On December 23rd, 2019, Columbia filed revisions to its gas service tariff in compliance with Commission Order Number 89403, issued December 18th, 2019, in case number 9609. Revisions to this filing.
Ms. Shaw,
Oh,
a little closer to the mic, please.
sorry.
Thank you.
Revisions to this filing were made January 8th, 2020. Order number 89403 revised the depreciation portion of the proposed order of the Public Utility Law Judge, thereby impacting the final revenue requirement. However, the Commission affirmed all other portions of the proposed order, including, but not limited to, rate design, revenue allocations, and certain tariff revisions. Staff has reviewed the company's proposed allocation of the gas revenue increase for all customer classes, the company's proposed rate revisions, and the company's tariff revisions, and finds that they all comport with the Commission's order. Staff recommends the Commission accept Columbia's revised tariff pages in mail log number 228099 for filing with an effective date of December 18th, 2019.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Counsel for the utility.
Good morning, Megan Moore on behalf of Columbia Gas of Maryland. I'm here for any questions, but also want to thank staff and especially the accounting division for working with us through the minor depreciation error.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Do commissioners have questions on item 12? Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, for item number 12, I move we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of December 18, 2019.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved.
Item number 13 is a request from Columbia Gas of Maryland, Inc. for approval of its 2020 Stride project list and associated surcharges.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Annette Garofalo on behalf of Commission staff. Staff has filed comments, but my comments today will be a little different than what you have read. By order number 88852, issued October 1, 2018, the Commission approved a Stride 2 plan for Columbia with a replacement rate of approximately 8 miles of main per year, or 40 miles by the end of 2023. As part of the order, which was the adoption of a settlement, Columbia revised its Stride 2 proposals to reflect, among other things, estimates reflecting annual projections for each year of its 5-year Stride 2. The projections, which reflect an annual escalation rate of 3.25%, show the estimated spend for 2020, that is the allowed estimated spend, to be $16,376,000. Staff has reviewed Columbia's second Stride 2 project list and surcharge calculations. All projects have been thoroughly examined and found to be Stride eligible. Thus, staff does not recommend against any project on Columbia's project list. However, due to the expense that would be incurred by completing all of these projects, staff cannot recommend, in light of the Stride plan adopted in 2018, that the Commission approve the entire project list. Staff continues to recommend that the Commission direct the company to provide the, so we don't recommend that you adopt the entire project list. But staff continues to recommend, and this was in our original recommendation, that the Commission direct the company to provide the estimated footages of the following materials: pre-1971 coated steel and pre-1982 plastic pipe that it intends to replace for each project in future Stride filings. And this is something that our engineering division looked into carefully to make sure that these were Stride eligible, and these projects do incur some safety aspects. Staff has reviewed Columbia's surcharges, which are dependent on the company's project list, and the base rates put in place by Commission Order Number 89403, issued December 18th, 2019, were Columbia's project list accepted, staff would recommend that the company's surcharges also be accepted because they were properly calculated. However, in light of the need for a revised project list, staff recommends that Columbia's proposed STRIDE surcharges as filed be rejected. In light of the requirements of Columbia's STRIDE 2 plan, staff recommends the Commission direct Columbia Gas of Maryland, Inc. to amend its project list to reflect a spend of approximately $16.4 million as required by its STRIDE 2 plan, approved in case number 9479, and that the company refile its proposed surcharges consistent with the revised project list. Representatives from the Engineering Division, Accounting Division, and Telecommunications, Gas, and Water Division are available to answer any questions you may have, as am I.
Thank you for that update, Ms. Garofalo. Counsel for Office of People's Counsel.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Joe Cleaver on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. I'd like to make a preliminary comment before I get into the meat of what we said in our filed comments. OPC is well aware of the concerns that this commission has stated with respect to the replacement of low-pressure systems, particularly Commissioner O'Donnell. We've heard those concerns, particularly in the wake of the incident in Massachusetts in 2018. And the four projects that are the focus of our comments do entail the replacement of low pressure. In making that recommendation, there's no suggestion on the part of OPC that to do those projects would be imprudent, that there's not a need for them, or that they're not related to the safety of Columbia's system. But rather, our comments are based on the conclusion that we drew that those projects are inconsistent with the company's approved STRIDE plan, which was the product of a settlement, which was incorporated into a proposed order from Public Utility Law Judge Lawrence, which then became a final order of this commission when it wasn't appealed. And there's kind of two general bases for our conclusion that these projects are inconsistent with the plan that was filed and approved. One concerns budget, as Ms. Garofalo mentioned a moment ago, and the other one concerns scope. And I think that the budget issue is more cut and dry, so I'll take that first, and then I'll lead into the scope. As Ms. Garofalo mentioned, the budget, the estimated budget for year 2 of Columbia's STRIDE plan was $16.4 million. And that was actually the product of a fiercely litigated issue in the case before a settlement was reached. When the company filed its initial STRIDE plan, it set forth its estimated budgets for each of the 5 years and said that they were going to roughly do the same amount of replacement. Initially it was 8.5 miles. It ended up being 8 in the settlement, but they said they were going to do the same amount of, generally the same amount of replacement every year, but then we saw the budget escalating year after year. And through discovery, we learned that the company had applied a 4% escalation rate to its budget year over year. OPC's consultant in the case in chief recommended a lower escalation rate. His testimony was that 2.5% would be more appropriate. And we went back and forth in the various rounds of testimony until finally the escalation rate was settled at 3.25%, which is the precise midpoint between the company's litigation position and OPC's litigation position. And pursuant to that agreement, the company filed a revised STRIDE plan, which is attached to the stipulation and settlement, which is in turn attached to the proposed order of the Public Utility Law Judge. And on page 13 of that plan, it sets forth the budgets, the estimated budgets for the 5 years that the company's STRIDE 2 plan covers, 2019 through 2023. And those budgets, if you look into the math, they go up by 3.25% every year, pursuant to the settlement agreement. The proposed spend for the company's 2020 STRIDE project list, as the company has filed it, would be $24.8 million, which is an increase of about 62% from the settled upon budget for year 1. So again, it was supposed to go up 3.25%. It went up 62%, an increase of I think $9.4 million. So the spend that the company has has set forth what it plans to do in Stride in 2020 is grossly inconsistent with the settlement agreement. Now, staff was onto this issue pretty early and served a data request and asked the company, and this is staff 9-1, which we attached to our comments, and staff asked the company, why are you spending so much more for doing roughly the same amount of work in 2020 as compared to what you did in 2019? And the company said there were two drivers. One was a project called the Mount Savage project that entailed 8-inch steel main, and the company explained that that was a lot more expensive in terms of cost per foot. And the other driver was that the company said that a number of the projects that it was performing had a lower priority pipe ratio, which is what the company identifies as what it sounds like, the pipe that takes priority in terms of getting replaced through Stride through its plan, and that therefore, because those projects would contribute less to the overall 8-mile per year target as compared to the total amount of main replaced as compared to a project that entailed only priority pipe, that those also drove the costs for 2020. Now, so what the company is essentially saying is that the types of projects that we've decided to do for 2020 are more expensive than what we contemplated when we filed and then revised our Stride plan pursuant to a settlement. These projects are a lot more expensive, and the approach that the company has taken is, we said we would do 8 miles. These are the 8 miles we want to do. They're a lot more expensive than the 8 miles that I suppose they thought they were going to be doing this year when they settled this case in 2018. And so, it costs what it costs. But the problem is that directly conflicts with the budgeted aspect of the settlement agreement. So that begs the question of, where does that leave the company? The Stride statute freely allows for amendments. We've seen that before, and it proceeds there's a statutory deadline and so on. We've seen that from two companies before, when companies midway through their Stride plans in Stride 1 with BGE and Washington Gas both determined, hey, there's some other asset class we need to focus on, or we want to shift our focus to something else. We saw an amendment. If the company has determined in its engineering judgment that it needs to focus more on these types of low pressure systems, and those do have this higher cost, the company could certainly file an amendment to the Stride plan, and then that would give the parties the opportunity to conduct discovery, to have testimony, see the company's testimony, and then to make recommendations to the commission based on that change. But as filed here, the 2020 project list is inconsistent with the settlement agreement. It's inconsistent with the Stride plan, and some revision is in order here, Your Honor. When we looked at this and we looked at those 4 projects with the low priority pipe ratio, and we backed those out, you can see that brings the budget, we mentioned this in our letter, down to $17.4 million, which is a lot closer to 16.4 than the approximately 25 that's been proposed. The settlement agreement does give the company the opportunity to request a change to that 3.25% escalation rate. But one, we didn't really see any express request in that regard, and two, even if we had, I think a reasonable reading of the settlement agreement would be that would cover instances where maybe the company said, oh, maybe 4% or maybe even 5% is more appropriate, not 62% as we've seen with this filing. I would also note, Your Honor, as a practical matter, this company is, as this commission knows, always up against the residential surcharge cap, and almost always has a $2 residential cap surcharge amount right off the bat. My understanding from conversations with the company, and Ms. Moore can correct me if I'm wrong, is that even if you backed out the 4 projects that we focus on in our comments, they would still be at the $2 cap. So it begs the question of why these projects were even included in the first place, because the company's not going to get recovery for them, and based on the company's current rate case practice, where it files every year, it's done so every year since 2013, these projects will, assuming the company does that and assuming that there's no imprudency issues, these projects will enter into base rates about a year from now if the company continues on its current schedule. and there isn't enough room in light of the cap to recover for them anyway. So that's just something I would mention for the Commission's consideration. If I may, and just in closing, I think you're going to hear from the company that while these projects that we've proposed, they meet the requirements of the STRIDE statute. These are STRIDE eligible projects. And Your Honor, I would submit that that's not really the issue before the Commission. The issue before the Commission is whether or not these projects fall within the scope of this particular company's plan and the budget of this particular company's plan. And our conclusion is that they don't.
Thank you. Let's now hear from Ms. Moore on behalf of the company.
I'm going to put the easy case down, the rate case. That was a nice one.
It's your warm-up. A lot to respond to.
Yes. Once again, Chairman, Commissioners, Megan Moore on behalf of Columbia Gas of Maryland. I'd also like to introduce Ken Fillion, Principal Engineer that works closely with our STRIDE projects and has since the inception of our program. So we are both here for questions, but I do have a few brief points, if I may. Thank you. I first anticipated coming here and letting you know that we were in agreement with staff's filed comments. We are still in agreement with their actual filed comments. Unfortunately, we were caught off guard late in the afternoon, evening time frame yesterday, and spoke with both staff and OPC, and staff chose to change its position a bit with regard to our project list. We haven't had a ton of time to vet staff's position. We have discussed the projects in question from OPC's comments. So bear with me as we are a bit unprepared for staff's position. A few things. Mr. Cleaver brought up the escalation rate. That was the subject of our settlement in case number 9479 in, I think, late summer of 2018. And bear with me a second as I read the sentence, the second sentence. In that, we agreed to budget our forecast with 3.25% escalation factor. The second sentence says that any party, Columbia, OPC, or staff, has the ability to request an adjustment to the escalation rate in the context of the company's annual filing, made on or before November 1st of each year, based on the company's experience and actual costs incurred. I believe Mr. Cleaver suggests that perhaps the company should file an amendment, and our position is that this issue is not yet ripe because we actually haven't incurred those costs for the 2020 projects, and it isn't our experience yet. To the best of our knowledge, we do know and concede, yes, the budget is in excess of our original projection from 2018. I will say that original projection in 2018 was only based on 1 year's worth of projects, which was 2019 at the time, and the escalation factor then just applied to that number. So now that we have a full roster, we know the projects that we'd like to, and that we request your approval of, many of which are some of the riskiest project, involve the riskiest pieces of main in our system that we'd like to replace. Now we're showing our best estimate as being closer to that 25
But
million.
Ms. Moore, are you saying that you would not be in violation of the terms of the settlement with regard to the escalation factor until such time that you actually incur the costs, and then you would be in violation of the settlement?
Mr. Chairman, what I'm saying is, how we're reading it is that we wouldn't come in and ask for an adjustment to that escalation factor based on this sentence saying in our experience and actual costs incurred. We are just starting some of these projects now, and so that's our reading of that provision.
These projects will begin construction regardless of whether or not they are eligible for STRIDE?
Not all of them, sir. Some of them, as you can see on the roster, will have a quarter in which that we expect to start them. I will say, for the 4 that are in question, based on OPC's comments, one of them has begun, That would be the Vine Street?
Correct.
Thank you. And two more
So,
points.
so Ms. Moore,
Yes.
going back to the settlement,
Yes.
the settlement has 16.4 and then escalation factors, and it has a, what's the total amount for the 5 years? I don't have that in front of me, if you know.
I do, if you could bear with me for a second.
Sure.
I don't have it summed in my revised plan, but if you add it together, it looks like 15.8, 20 in 2019, 2020, 16.4 approximately, 2021, just under 17, 2022, 17 and a half, 2023, about 18. So I'm sorry, my
So-
lawyer math is poor.
Right. Well, let's say, whatever number that is. Is it your position? And I see there are people smiling at me, and they could probably tell me what that is. But yeah, maybe Ms. Garofalo can add it up for me while I'm talking.
I was doing I added it up to 100 million because. it's
100 million,
approximately
okay.
20
In the
million
80s,
a
I
year.
believe. 80s?
80s. Yeah, I was going to go between the 70s and 80s.
Thank you.
Okay, let's
Mr.
say it's.
Cleaver gets 84.6.
Oh, let's say $85 million is the total over 5 years. Is it your position that if, that it's appropriate because, despite the settlement being at $85 million, that it's appropriate to spend $100 million because of these projects? Or are you saying that I want to spend more this year, but I'll spend less in future years?
I'm only saying what we know now is the 2020 projects.
Well, but this is very important because if the commission were to approve the 2020 project, does that mean we're going to have less spending in future years because you're using up some of your future spending? Because this is a 5-year program, and you settled at an annual amount that's about the same plus an escalation, and now you're saying I want to spend significantly more in 2020. So what are we supposed to draw from that conclusion, that you're going to spend more than 85, that you think it's appropriate and consistent with the settlement to spend more than the $85 million, or that you plan to spend approximately $85 million within that time frame?
In 2018, we had hoped that the program would cost $85 million, approximately. What we know now is that our costs for 2020 are estimated to be more than we originally anticipated.
Is there anything in the settlement that anticipates spending more than $85 million? Ms. Garofalo, Mr. Cleaver, or is there any language in the settlement that says that, it might exceed that amount?
I think the only thing that could be interpreted in that way, because the plan, which was adopted, has a chart of how much per year, is that if a request is made by one of the parties, then that could be changed. But there is nothing such that you asked about.
All right, thank you. Please proceed, Ms. Moore.
Thank you. So, I would also like to add that I realize that there are estimates in our plan, but there's also a commitment to a certain amount of mileage. If these 4 projects were disallowed, we would be below our 8-mile commitment, and therefore run the risk of not showing the acceleration that's been a very vital part of the program. Our initial stride case was rejected because we were not showing the acceleration. So I asked the commission, we still stand by our position that these projects are necessary for the safety and reliability of our system. We'd like to include them to make sure that we're meeting our mileage commitment as well. And lastly, when we're looking at specifically the 4 projects that OPC takes issue with, 2 of those have the highest Optimane scores and are the riskiest projects in our roster of the 10 projects. One has a score of 921, and the other is somewhere between 500 and 600. And I just, if we are taking those out of the STRIDE program, we run the risk of saying that those aren't, safety isn't a concern, because
I would gather OPC would say, and Mr. Cleaver could correct me if I'm wrong, well then go ahead and do those projects and let's remove some of the less risky projects. So the number balances out back to the $16, $17 million. It's your determination as to which projects are the highest risk and should be undertaken. I think People's Counsel is more concerned about honoring the budget commitment over the 5-year period, and we're only in year 2 at this point. Mr. Cleaver, if I took liberties with the office's position, please correct me.
I got a lot of
I think
And perhaps, why don't we have Ms. Moore and your counsel sit at the table just to make a little more comfortable. We might be here for a little while longer. Mr. Cleaver.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Your Honor. I would also, again, just reiterate that, if the company believes that these are risky projects, but they're based on their cost inappropriate for their STRIDE program, they should still do them. They should start work on them as soon as possible, and they can just recover them through base rates. And because of the kind of unusual and unique circumstances of this company, with the fully capped surcharge and the yearly rate cases, I don't know if I see what the actual difference would be for the company.
Ms. Moore, can you respond to that? We have seen your LDC come in annually with respect to rate cases, so you could do Vine Street, Cannon, George, and collect that in your next case, as opposed to going through STRIDE. How do you respond to that? Because we could take care of these highest risk projects and present them in a rate case.
yes, Mr. Chairman, that that is one option. The company still maintains that these are STRIDE eligible projects, and they are included in the roster that makes up the 8 miles of
And
that
staff
commitment.
council agrees with you. These are STRIDE eligible projects.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Staff of their engineering division as well.
They're eligible, but they exceed the cost of the budget. Hence ineligible for recovery in this 5-year STRIDE plan.
I'm sorry. I would like to also speak to the $2. That is correct. If these 4 were removed, the residential cap would still be at $2. And so if we did continue with these projects this year, that would be, we would be able to use our regular cadence then to put them into rate base.
I recognize safety is very important. I was reading the transcript of the Columbia Gas hearings that we had in Cumberland and Hagerstown just a few months ago. When was that, Mr. Cleaver? Just in the fall?
I believe, actually, it was my birthday is September 5th. I was in Hagerstown Community College to celebrate Columbia.
September 5th. And I recall reading some of the testimony from citizens that it's a rather economically depressed area. Citizens were concerned with respect to the increases. But we do have a budget in place, and I am concerned. I'm glad People's Counsel pointed this out and hence caused our staff to change their position overnight, unfortunately, at the last minute, which puts you in a bind to respond adequately today. I recognize that. But on its face, this request does seem hard to swallow. Let me open it up to my fellow commissioners for questions. Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure where to start with all this. I guess I'll just start on a positive note and say that I appreciate Columbia Gas and NiSource as the parent for recognizing the need to prioritize low-pressure main replacement. Of all the utilities in the United States of America, NiSource Utilities should be keenly and are keenly well aware of this, because you're the utility, or you're the parent company that essentially lost a utility in New England with the tragic circumstances in New England. So I wanted to say that on a positive note. Thank you for doing this. BG&E did this recently by chronicling their replacement of low pressure main, and I lauded them for that, and I will say the same for you. Thank you for making sure that we get this stuff out of the ground and out of service. So, having said that, I do have some questions. So let me start with a real specific one before I get to broader issues. The Amstel Street Winchester Road project is the only one of the chronicled projects that says replacing some low pressure main and some medium pressure main, but I don't have a delineation of how much low pressure main is being replaced there.
Ken Fillion, principal engineer. There is a combination of both. I don't have that broken down currently at the moment, but by all means I can provide that.
So that's the biggest project on the list. It's 11,510 feet in total, but I don't know if it's 3 feet of low pressure or 20 feet of low pressure main and 490 feet of medium pressure main. I don't know. So I'm just curious how much that is. We can get to that later. It's not necessary. Ms. Moore, you said that when asked, would you do these projects anyway, if we don't approve this, you said probably not. Could you say why that is? Why you won't do them?
I apologize if I said that. I did not mean to say we would not do them. That was
important.
not my intention.
Okay, so you will.
Yes,
do that.
let's correct the record, and we can still do them. We are slated to do all 10. We have the permitting in place, the scoping. We've walked the projects. We have our timetable set out. You know, some of them will start in the first quarter, weather dependent, and if not the second or third if they're smaller. We right now are committed and will do them if approved. If they're not approved, we could evaluate whether to push them out to another year. I will say, as I did remark, there are 2 that are have a pretty high Optimane scores, so we would and could look at doing those even if they are not included in the stride surcharge.
So you also said something else, because I wrote it down. You said all of these projects are necessary for safety and reliability of our system.
Yes.
Well, so under your general obligation as a public utility company,
Mm-hmm.
if these projects are necessary for the safety and reliability of your system, you have an obligation to do them, stride or not, right? Would you
Right.
agree?
Yes.
I'd like to hear a clear answer. We're going to do these because they're necessary for the safety and reliability of our system.
We are set to do them. Okay, we are set to do all 10. We haven't had an instance in our stride program where we had projects taken out like this, and I haven't had time to discuss with the business if that's indeed the path forward. But
you're not going to get advanced recovery anyway. You're capped. So why I hear this ambiguity of whether or not we may or may not do them. You're not going to get advanced recovery anyway, and they're necessary for the safety and reliability of your system. Why don't you give me a straight yes? We're going to do them because we need to, because it's the right thing to do, and it's our obligation under Maryland's public utility article.
I understand that respectfully, sir. What I'm trying to get at is if we have to do some sort of swap or bring a project up. I'm not sure that that's even possible, but I'm trying to balance that with the need to meet the mileage commitment as well.
Well, let me just say it this way, because we have this on the record now in front of this commission. If the projects are not done and you have a Andover type experience in one of these projects, we're going to revisit this discussion. I can almost guarantee you that. Thank you.
Understand. Thank you.
Any additional questions from commissioners? Just a moment, please.
Mr. Chairman? I
Commissioner
don't have any
Herman.
questions, but I do have discussion. I will say that I'm concerned with respect to, we have a settlement here and the parties have agreed to that, and I don't see any filings from Columbia saying, we know we agreed to the settlement, but this is really important and we need to do that. And I think that that's a step that, the commission could decide at that point. But I think that, we have settlements and people rely on those. And I think we want to rely on the settlements because people give things up. Everybody gives up something in a settlement. And so, from my standpoint, I would accept, I believe, the recommendation of staff, the new recommendation of staff, because I'm concerned that there hasn't, this may be procedural, and people may talk about this as procedural, but settlements are important to this commission. They're important to this commissioner, at least. And I feel that we should, in fact, if you're going to do something that is significantly different than the settlement, there ought to be a discussion with the settling parties, and there ought to be justifications for why, and we ought to have an understanding as to whether this is for just 2020 or is it for all of the subsequent years as well, and are we just going to keep, ratcheting up year after year, and then we have a different amount. So, and I'm not prejudging whether that would or wouldn't be appropriate. What I'm saying is that we need to have that discussion within the realm of the settlement with the settling parties. And so therefore, I agree with the Commissioner O'Donnell that if this is something that needs to be done for the safety and reliability of your system, that's incumbent on you to do that. And so that is my position. I'm not prejudging whether I would say that we would revise the settlement in any way, but at this point, I don't think I think these are numbers, and I do believe in settlements, and I think we should hear from we should have justifications for moving away from settlements. So that's my position, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Moore, prior to Columbia Gas making its filing on December 23rd, did you have conversations, did the utility have conversations with any of the settling parties with respect to the filing?
We had multiple conversations because we had multiple filings here. And multiple filings were when we find the issue in the rate case, it also impacted the stride surcharge. So some of the reason for the multiple filings, but we had conversations. I think the week after Christmas, and Annette, Joe, and I had a conversation last evening as well.
Okay, but after Christmas was after the 23rd when this updated list was filed, and I would have suggested that a conversation prior to this filing could have obviated the need for this discussion today. At this, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I did want to acknowledge too the depressed nature of the economy in this area. Luke Mill has recently closed in Western Port. LaVale, Barton. These are very hard hit areas of our state, and our fellow Marylanders deserve our consideration too. But they also deserve to have safe, reliable public utilities. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to make a motion that will be consistent with staff's recommendation. And my motion is that the Commission directs the company to amend its project list to reflect a spend of $16.4 million as required by its Stride 2 proposal in this case, which is case number 9479. Direct the company to refile its proposed surcharges consistent with the amended project list. And finally, as I believe the Columbia Gas has conceded, we would direct the company to provide estimated footages for pre-1971 coated steel and pre-1982 plastic pipe that it intends to replace for each project in any future Stride filing.
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
Commissioner Linton, I saw you might have had a question before
Yes.
we take a vote on those three.
more of a friendly amendment
Yes.
to your recommended motion. I understand the parties have suggested 16.4 million as the approved budget amount. There is, however, additional language to suggest the actual amount is $16,376,000. So there's about a $600,000 difference, which, I mean, it's a substantial amount of money. So I don't know if we need to be very specific, and I'll turn to staff for that question. Should we have the specific number?
The 16.4 was merely a rounding of the amount that's contained in the settlement, which is you correctly stated.
Okay. So I would recommend we just amend it to the actual number from the settlement.
Thank you.
16 million.
Let me ask Mr. Cleave or Commissioner Linton, were you conceding a $17 million figure?
Your Honor, yes. I mean, that's what we said in our comments. That would be recognizing that the settlement does allow for the company to come in its project list filing and to say, you know, we needed to escalate the budget more this year based on past experience. You know, even though the company didn't really do that, in the spirit of that that provision, and based on the fact that that's less than 10% of the amount of the settlement, that's not the kind of thing. If the company had determined these are the projects we absolutely have to do, it's 8 miles and it's going to be $1 million. That is within the ballpark of what OPC would be unlikely to have raised an objection to. So because those four were the four that jumped out at us, backing them out, we thought for our ultimate recommendation to show reasonableness and in the spirit of recognizing the company's engineering judgment that was what the recommendation we would make.
Okay, thank you.
In
So
light of the
your office was showing some flexibility, but in this case, I think it would best be appropriate to stick with the original number. And Commissioner Linton, can you read that again? 16 million.
The original number was 16,376,000.
Can we add the word approximately in front of that?
We can. Ms. Moore may take liberties with that.
If they have to submit a list that hits that dollar mark exactly, it's going to be impossible.
I trust the utility's judgment in this case. So based on that amendment to the motion, I'll take a vote at this point. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 13 is a proposal from Baltimore Gas and Electric Company to reduce its stride surcharges under Rider 16 to reflect the implementation of revised gas base rates.
Good morning, Commissioners. Margaret Tuberty on behalf of staff. In this filing, BGE is proposing tariff revisions and revised surcharges to reflect the introduction of new caps and the reduction of its stride surcharge after the implementation of revised base rates pursuant to Order 89400 in case number 9610. Under the terms of the order, the proposed revised surcharges became effective on December 17th, 2019, concurrent with the effective date of the company's base rates, which the Commission approved last week at the January 15th administrative meeting. The surcharges remained in effect until the company's 2020 stride factor became effective on January 1st, 2020, as approved by the Commission. The caps within the tariff are identical to those approved within BGE's 2020 stride filing. Staff recommends that the Commission accept the tariff for filing with an effective date of December 17th, 2019, and further accept the company's proposed surcharges for the period of December 17th through December 31st, 2019.
Thank you, Ms. Tuberty. Ms. Sikora, we should have probably moved your item up with the other BGE items. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I got a sticky. Someone put their tag on the chair, so I got that off during the Columbia meeting.
Thank you for making productive use of the time. Do you have anything to add?
No, I don't, but I'm here for any questions.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions? Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For item number 14, I move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of December 17th, 2019, and accept the company's proposed surcharges for the period of December 17th, 2019 through December 31st, 2019.
Thank you. All in favor? The motion is approved. Seeing no additional business today, this meeting is adjourned.